Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Let's get started, inshallah. We'll try to go over what we did yesterday and then will continue on the custom validation, and a couple of things went wrong. And before that, I just wanted to go over something that I discussed not in the last session but the previous prior one to that. We talked about tree shaking concept, and the tree shaking concept I mistakenly uh, explained that the tree shaking will or the ng build with production flag will take care of unused packages, but that's not the case. Unused packages we have to take care of them ourselves. What it will do is shake off the modules that we are not using anymore, that we are not actually using in our application. So it does that by looking at the providers array, and if there are any providers not defined over there, but we still have as a service or as a module, those will be shaken off, but not the unused packages. That is what I just wanted to clarify. And let's move on to our recapping what we did last time. We tried to implement our own pipes. We looked at the built-in pipes that were provided by Angular as well as some directives, and we differentiated between the structural directives as well as attribute directives, and we tried to write our custom, but these two didn't work. And we'll just have a look at why they did not work and how to make that working. Actually, basically what went wrong with our implementation last time around. Just check. And we looked at the validation, and we tried to provide specific validation messages and looked at how to do that. And we implemented custom validation on our reactive forms. On the template driven forms, we needed directives, and we needed to resolve why the directive that we were trying to work did not work. So we'll continue on that, and if everything goes smooth, then we'll try to wrap up the course. Otherwise, we'll have one more session, inshallah. So back to why our directive and pipe did not work. So I went back and looked at it. Apparently, so what was going wrong was, let me just show first that now they are working. We see the light blue highlight that we used, that we implemented in a custom directive. And for the custom pipe, I don't know why I removed this. Just so we have mixed case pipe over here on our product name, and now we see a mixed case for the product name. Basically, it's an alternate uppercase and lowercase for the product name. Let's go back and have a look at mixed case pipe one more time. So what we did is we implemented an interface called pipe transform, and it exposes a method that called transform that actually transforms our value and gives back a transformed value that needs to be displayed. So let's go back and have a look at the date, and the date that we are getting is in some format, something like August 30, 2020. That's the default format, and if you want some other format, the date pipe takes an input. It takes many different kinds of formats as input, but one of the most common is, at least in US, is the month goes first and the date next. And if you want this format, then all we need to do is provide that format to the date pipe, and it will change that display value accordingly. So now we see the format that we have provided, August 30, 2020. So if you want something else, date first and month next, so you just have to change that. And how to provide this input? Our pipe right now is just a plain pipe. It just uh, transforms the text over here to uppercase and lowercase alternatively. So we see a second argument as args provided over here. That's where we can take the arguments for the pipe. So the arguments could be something like, okay, just do it for just 10 characters or starting 10 characters rather than the entire product name. Something like that. I mean, it depends on our use case scenario. But instead of doing anything with that, let's just log that and see what I'm talking about. Some input for the pipe. Here I'll log and leave it at that. So mixed case pipe. We see the args array, and the first element of the args array is some input for the pipe. So that's how it can be used. Right now, I cannot think of any scenario. You probably got the idea. It's just about logic right now. Whatever logic needs to be implemented via this args can be implemented in this method utilizing this second parameter. So let's go back to that our highlight directive that we tried implementing and which was not working. And the reason why they were not working was we defined them in app module, and app module or any module that they are defined in needs exporting from that module. And if I try to consume that app module from a different module, in our case product management module, we were creating a circular dependency. So product management module was dependent on the app module anyway, and if it explicitly do that, the routes were getting circulated. I mean, the routes were going in circles, and that's why I couldn't import the app module directly. So for that purpose, I had to create a shared module, and that was a good learning for me. So basically, bottom line, what I did is created a shared module and put our pipes and directives in that shared module and exported them from there. And the product management module, we have to import that module to be able to work with those directives and pipes. So the stage changes are the changes that I made to make them work. I'll just commit the state changes. So I mean, I'm maintaining this Git profile with all the changes for every day or as a unit for you to be able to go over and have a look at the changes that we did for uh, a certain concept. So those are pushed up or committed. I'll push them up to the repository and then we'll continue after that. So the mixed case pipe, all I did is added the console log statement for the second parameter, and on the product component, I just added a date format to the date pipe. So let's get back to the our highlight directive, and what we did last time we just highlighted some the text that this directive is provided on. So I just change the color to have a look a little bit different from what it was. So we'll go further on. We'll, as the name suggests, as we name the directive, hover highlight, highlight on hover. Right now, it's we are just highlighting regardless of it is hovered or not. So for that purpose, just go back to my reference and then get the code from there, and then we'll go over the code. We have seen this input element previously on a component. Basically, it exposes this particular property as an input property that could be provided a value from its parent component. I have written a class called back and forecolors. Ideally, this class should go some place where we have defined the models. But for the to be quick, I just let's just have it over here. We can move maybe easily. Let's see. We are done with that. Okay. We'll just import it. We have to import it from here. We'll use Visual Studio to automatically import that. Okay. This is a better organization than leaving the class over here. So host listener, I'm just importing right now. And what it is what is the host of our directive? It's the element that we have defined or we have declared this particular directive on. Okay, it's in the products component. So this is the host. The A tag is the host of our directive. So on that we can listen to the events. So host listener, using the host listener, we are trying to listen to mouse enter event, and on mouse enter event, we will highlight just comment these two. We use the color of the text as white and background as black. And it will stay like that if we don't code for the blur event or the when it is not hovered anymore. So we'll have to go back to the mouse sleeve event and set it to null. So we are listening basically to two events on mouse enter. We are styling it differently on mouse leave. We are going back to what it was. Now you can see when I hover over it, the color and the background colors are changed. And how to, instead of hard coding these two colors, how to accept some input from the user. In this case, it will be another developer who wants to style it differently. And if you want to go further, then we can ask the end user itself via some maybe input of type text to give the colors to us or of type color. So how to do that? We expose a property called app highlight color, and that will be of type back and four colors. And using that input property, will style our element on mouse over or mouse enter. In short, mouse hover. So we haven't defined those colors on our element now, which we'll do now. And that input property was named app highlight color. And we'll quickly provide it with a JSON object, something like this. So because our input property accepts some input of type back and forecolors, which has two properties. One is back color and one is forecolor. So we need to provide it provide the input in that format. That's what we are doing over here. Back color is a string that has black as text, and forecolor is a string that has wheat color as text. If you go back and look at this, oops, it's not working. It's not throwing error either. We have a closer look at the code. It's getting that object dot element dot native color. And fine. Okay. Go back to writing the entire object rather than its forecolor property, and probably that will give me some clue. Command just out and then inspect the element. do this list dot app highlight color dot for color, make it red, and then console log again. Let's see what it does after me manually doing it in the component class. Okay, I think I know what I did wrong. It needs to be bound rather than provided as just an attribute. So now because I have or commented out the mouse leaf code, I don't need this anymore. The color is not going back to their defaults. Okay, now that should work. Now that is taken care of, let's move on to our custom validation. So we were at we implemented no spaces directive or no spaces validation using that no spaces validation on our reactive forms, and we were, I believe, in the process of writing the same validation for our template driven form. Let me open that up, no spaces directive. So just copied and pasted the error message and or the error diff from the reactive forms to our template driven form, and just change the template reference variable instead of the actual form control or reactive form control. So let's see what is the status of it, if it is working just fine or not. Yeah. So let's go back, actually recap one more time with respect to the custom validation. So over here we have two functions. They both validate if there are if the input or the text input is just spaces. So in case we don't need any input for this particular validator function, we just write a plain function that accepts a control of type, that accepts a abstract control and returns a validation error object or null. Null implies there are no errors, validation errors object implies that there is some error. And in case of any error, we return a key value pair or key string pair that tells the consumer that there is some error, and the consumer can look at this key. If the key is present or is set to true, then they can display their custom messages. So in case the validator needs to accept some parameter, some argument, then we write a function that returns a validator function. Fn stands for function. Basically, we write another function inside of it and return that function. That function is exactly, in our case, it's exactly same as, or most likely it will be exactly same as when there is no input. That means we are assuming certain things. Or there might be cases where we don't need any input at all. We don't even have to assume. But over here, there is a condition that we need to accept some input from the consumer. So that input, for that input, we have to wrap our validation function inside another function and return that inner function. This is for reactive forms. For template driven forms, we could utilize the same function, but we have to write a directive that implements the validator interface, and that validator interface provides a validate method, and in our case we are just calling that function, the no spaces function, and returning the result. So this is about template driven custom validation that doesn't need any input. What if an input is needed? So similar to what we have done earlier, we add an input decorator for our input. So I'll just copy it from here. So basically what we are doing is like, okay, we need an input, so we expose an input property called num, which will be the alias for it will be app validate after certain null. So what we are trying to do with our custom validation that accepts an input is kick in this validation after the user has entered that number of characters. So we need an input field, input property for that. So instead of just calling the no spaces, we doesn't accept any input. What we'll do is return no spaces to the second version of our function that actually accepts that. So we just pass in the number, the property that we have exposed for the consumer to be able to provide us that number, that input. So that's all it needs to be. And what I have code, the code I have over here is kind of a safe code that checks if this dot number exists, it is not null, then do this, else just return null. Let's assume that this validation is passed and just return null. Or we could, for this function, we need to provide something extra that is called control. So we need to provide this control, particular control, so that it can use to return that particular function as the control, this particular C, which is abstract control in our case. Now over here we need to provide that input that could be provided as equals to that number that we want the validation to kick in after. Let's check it out. Oops, it work. Look at the usage. So my directory is not named app no spaces anymore. Let's go down. Just that, I mean, I prefer, in my reference, I prefer to have a different tag just for my testing purposes, but over here I'm using app no space, so I'll go back and change. So that was really inconsistent, and that was the reason it wasn't working, and hopefully this works. So this is how we do custom validation on reactive forms as and template driven forms. Let me move these two functions in a different file. And I'll go back and rename this file as custom validators to provide a more meaningful name. And most likely I will have errors all over the place, but that's okay. Custom validators. Just delete both of them and use Visual Studio IntelliSense to actually import all those. And not only that, let me also move this particular file out of this module because it's supposed to be generic across the application and move it to shared folder. So I'll have to fix all those things all over again. Yeah, I believe that's it. So I believe whatever was my agenda or the plan that I had for this course, I have taken care of all of them. Let me just have a glance at the table of contents, if you will, and see if I have missed anything or anything that is worth a repetition. Since we still have some time, let's have a look at HTTP calls. I did it many times, but not as a live example. So maybe since we have some time, maybe it's worth utilizing that time to actually go over and make some HTTP client calls. And that is out of my, what do you say, actual plan, but since we have time, let's utilize that. And then we'll wrap up, inshallah. We tried, uh, we tried to consume one of these requests for one of my demos to actually delay an HTTP call and see how the resolver actually resolves our HTTP call on a route until that request is successful. Mostly we'll console log, but we'll use one of our components to actually make those calls. So before even that, let me check everything in so that I can easily undo whatever changes we are doing further on. Something like that. Close all, and then let me open the home component. And from ng init itself, I'll make a calls to the third party service. For that, I need HTTP client from Angular common HTTP, and let's just make the call to this API first. This will be the URL, constant URL that I'm targeting right now. And this .http client, in this case we are just getting the product, so get method is sufficient for us. This is not the product, this is actually get users. So So let's see what happens. Let's just log console.log, just log users, and let's see what we get. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Any questions, even if it is not related to the course. general career advice or something, anything like that, please feel free to ask, inshallah. So this is this one, the provider for HTTP client. So basically we need to import that module in our component, in our root module. Just refer to this. So we need to import that one in our root module. Okay. So what we get is an observable, and until we subscribe, that call is not made to that URL. So until we subscribe, this remains idle. We will not get anything. So subscription is important. That's why I left it just like that, just to have a look and then go over the subscription concept one more time. So we need to subscribe, even if we are not consuming the methods provided by that subscribe or the callbacks provided by the subscribe, we still need to subscribe. We are not doing anything, but unless we subscribe, we will not get. The call is not made to that, to this particular URL. So subscribe, and then we cannot, subscribe doesn't return, it returns an object, but subscribe return a subscription, and that subscription actually could be consumed by those three methods, or by the first method, or by the first callback that is provided with the subscribe method. So data, the first callback, we just consume that data. So the constant users need to get out of there, and it should be just a declaration. It cannot be constant anymore. So we use let, and now users equals to. If there are any errors, we go for the next callback, and we do either log or do something, do some processing with that error. And if it, when it completes, we can have a callback for complete to that doesn't take any parameters, and we can just log into the console or have some logic over there. So this is about get. Get is pretty simple. We just call using the URL as a parameter, and then we subscribe to whatever is getting returned. Now if you look at the users, then we'll get that actual list that we saw over here. Oops, we got an undefined. Let's fix that. Yeah, actually that is whatever happened is a very good opportunity to explain something else. So this is an async call. That means we'll get the result of that async call over the period of time, not right away. So this, the call has started to the third party URL, and it will take probably a few milliseconds or maybe 1 second, 2 seconds, whatever the time it is, and we'll get this data after that. But because this is an asynchronous call, the control for this program comes over here right away, like to the line 21 right away after kicking off this call. So that's why users is undefined or still undefined. So let me just add some more information over here to better demonstrate what's going on. This is line 21. And I'll add one more statement, exact same statement. Console.log users. This is line 20. I'm glad that that I felt in this trap one more time. So we see line 21 gets console logged before line 20 because of that asynchronous call. So the call gets kicked off and the control comes over here right away. And when the data is available, this gets executed. Or when there is an error, the subscribe, whatever is inside the subscribe, the callbacks will get executed. Okay, now that concept is clear, let me move forward. And because that particular third party free URL provides us other things too, let's try to utilize the other thing. Okay. So that was for the list of user. For a single user, we need to provide that the query parameter at the end. So we are trying to get the user 2 out of there. So further the URL is this one, and it's still get constant single user URL. Instead of users, now it is just saying single user. So let user, and now we'll consume that data and set initialize to our user and line 20. The same concept over here, but we'll just have those things repeated again. This is not line 20 anymore, this is line 25. And this is line 26. So basically we are getting the user 2 whose ID is 2, email is janet.viewer at request response request.in, and first name is Janet, things like that. And let's see if we got the same result. We got the wrong result, we got the list again. Let's go back and have a look. Okay, I need to change the URL. This is single user URL, not just URL. So line 25. This is something else. Okay, this is the data. I think we got more than data, we got something else too. Some extra information about. Anyway, I think this is the data property, and we see one more property getting returned as part of that object. So that's fine, but still this information belongs to a single user. And the method was still get. Instead of a list, we were getting a single user depending on the API or the API parameters that were passed in. Now let's try to add one more a user. So this is supposed to be the URL, and for get the parameters are passed in the URL itself, whereas for post they need to be passed via a body. Constant create URL. And let the new user be of certain type. We'll look at we'll refer to that service and then add more data over there. And this dot We still make calls using the same HTTP client, but instead of get, we use post to pass in the data of the new user. Post accepts what? The URL and the data that we are trying to pass, and optionally it accepts other headers too. That headers pertain to what the web server is expecting. So anyway, at the minimum we need a URL and the data that needs to be passed in. So new user, and we still need to subscribe to that call. But in this case, it might not return us anything depending on how it is implemented at the server, or we might get an ID of that new user back, or we might get number of rows that were actually affected. By that, what I mean is if we are writing to the database and then if we just have one user table and we insert one record in that user table, we'll get one back. Or if we have a user table and let's say we are along with the user we are adding in user roles too, then most likely there will be two tables, one for user and one for user roles, and the number of rows affected might be two. So that kind of count might be written by the server. So it really depends on how it is implemented at the server. So let's go back and look at that create method. So what it expects is a name and a job. And what it responds with is entire user object that was created, the name and job that we have actually passed in, and the ID that it generated for that particular user, and the timestamp that the user was created at. So that's what we get. And then we need to pass these two things for the new user, and then whatever we get will read back in the same. Instead of using the same variable, let's create another variable, new user response, and write that to the console. And then let's try to consume the first callback or the data returned from the success callback. New user response equals to data, and I'll for the sake of saving some time, I'll skip writing that error and complete callbacks. Let me comment that out and go back and talk about something else. We already kind of did, but one more time. We see line 21 undefined, line 26 undefined. The same concept. These two calls get kicked off, and the control comes straight or right away to these two lines. That's why these the users and user is still undefined, because with observables or with asynchronous calls, the response comes over time, not right away. And these HTTP calls are written observable. Even observables kind of guarantee that there will be some, or not guarantee, but there with observables the value comes over time, not right away. I can't find some module. I don't know how it got added. Anyway, and will not only consume, but will also write to the log. Console log new user response. So whatever we passed, we got that back, as well as some additional information indicating that it was success. And similarly for what is supposed to be updating, uh, and post is supposed to be a creating call. So basically, we are trying to modify the same user, Morpheus, but the job is different now. So let update user, same call. I'll just use a different job rather than that is provided as part of that as sample in that API. I believe the same API should work. Same URL should work, not the API. So we are passing in update user, and I'll just read in whatever is written as the updated user in the same property. Assignable to few, very few. That did you mean to use any type instead? Let update user. Go back, look at the console. So now we get the success of our update operation. And then lastly, there should be a delete call. We can go over all these methods, at, but the most commonly used is get, post. Even put is not that used. I'm talking from my experience. And delete requires a lot of authorization, so delete is sparsely used. So most likely, in corporate environments or many corporate environments, there is no concept of delete. There is a concept of soft delete, which means that records in the database they are marked as deleted or not active anymore, but they are not actually deleted. So it depends on the kind of data. If the data is important for the historical purposes, then that kind of data is not deleted at all. So anyway, instead of post or put or get, in case of delete, we use the delete. So this is not HTTP client dot delete, and delete takes in the URL of that particular user. We can use the same URL as the single user URL, but our intent is instead of get, we are deleting. So based on that method, the server implements the delete at the same URL. So it will be single user URL. And there will be a response that we can read in the success callback. Just log whatever is returned as data to the console. believe delete went first, delete went before than the other calls because this was async. It took some time, but delete got triggered off first. But the implementation of that delete was not returning any data. Let's just go back to that third party and then confirm. Yeah, all we get is true or false response. We are not getting any data back. All right, that's about how to call, and most likely, I mean, I'm pretty sure that this will be implemented as a HTTP service or Angular service rather than getting consumed in the component itself. But because this was just for demonstration purposes, this is how it is done, and we kind of mimicked everything that the HTTP client does. Basically, it returns an observable, right? That's what we did with our product service, returning observables everywhere so that we could actually mimic a third party call, the actual REST API calls. So this is how you use REST API using the HTTP client provided by the Angular itself. One of the drawbacks, or I don't know drawback, but one of the con of other frameworks like React and Vue is they don't provide this HTTP client out of the box. And Angular makes it easier for us by providing that. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask even on this or anything else for that matter. Okay, I believe we are done, and I'm not sure the WhatsApp groups will be maintained or not after this, but I would request them to maintain them for a while, even though we didn't have a lot of questions. But if somebody have any, and or if they want to connect to me for any other reason, like for example, any guidance on any concept, not only Angular, but anything related to their careers, anything to related to technology. If I know something about it, then most likely I'll answer it, and I'll be more than happy to answer it actually. Uh, and before leaving, I would request everyone to make dua for the organizers especially because they put in a lot of effort in organizing this, and also make dua for me, and hopefully this course was beneficial, and if even if it is not, I tried. So jazakallah khairan for attending the course. Which one is async or sync call? The calls from the HTTP client. Yeah, most likely you are referring to HTTP client calls. They are asynchronous. I don't recall. I think, I mean, using RxJS, we can set timeout on these calls. And I believe there is a default timeout. I don't know. I don't recall that configuration at this point. But I do believe there is a default timeout on these calls. So any other questions? Yeah, I don't recall that timeout configuration at this point of time, but I do believe there is a configuration where we can increase the timeout. So I don't know specifically how to at this point, but I do believe there is a way. That's why I went to the definition over here, but I don't see any timeout configuration. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I understand that point. It's not only with big files or a lot of data, but maybe even if you are querying a simple thing like some ID, and then if the server needs to go through a lot of processing for to get that ID, and let's say we have a big table of millions of records, and we are trying to find something, some scalar value out of that, it will take time. So in that scenario, I believe there is a, I mean, there is a way. I'm pretty sure to increase the timeout or to keep on trying until eternity. But I don't recall at this point the actual the specific configuration, the specific property that actually helps us increase or decrease the timeout. No problem, Yakub. All right, inshallah. I believe whatever I thought is fundamental to get an understanding of the Angular fundamentals itself, I provided it, and there might be some scenarios where I kind of stumbled, uh, but I wanted to stumble because stumbling is part of a developer's journey. So we stumble and then we gather ourselves, we clean ourselves, we get smarter like that. I could have prepared and slides and the code beforehand before even starting the class, and then have a clean run of my code. But that would not be helpful. That would not stay in the mind for long. Even this will probably not stay in the mind, but still there is a chance that my stumbling and then gathering myself and having a hiccup and then fixing whatever went wrong would stay in your mind as well as my mind better than coming completely prepared and having a smooth run. So inshallah, make dua for me and make dua especially for the organizers. They put in a lot of effort, and they didn't have to. So inshallah, until next time, hopefully, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.